All right, people are already coming in. As you are coming in this evening, first of all, thank you for being here. Second of all, while you're getting situated, I'll just note that our chat is open tonight and our Q&A box is open tonight. So whether you have a question now or have one later, you can just type that into the box down at the bottom. Make sure you put it there and not in the chat. And in the meantime, I think everybody on screen is currently in the Boston area, but I would love to hear where some of you are tuning in from. If we can't be together in person, it's nice to find out where we are all sitting. So let's see, let people come in for another minute or so. Brooklyn, wonderful. I'm going to say the name of this Oregon place wrong. Corvallis, but grew up in Brookline. I don't think I'm ever going to pronounce the name in Oregon correctly, so we'll just assume I got that wrong.
No, I think you got it right. I think you got it right.
Yeah. Incredible. It can never happen again. New Rochelle and Oregon. Yeah, I have to say Oregon right. That's required by law. All right. Ooh, this
Dr.
is great.
Stern, you're drawing an international crowd already.
It's really impressive.
And this is the thing that we do like about Zoom. All right.
I'm sure
it may be about Dr. Stern.
I was about to say only half of them are here because I asked them personally to come. So,
I mean, that's what we look for in an author. Somebody who will ask people to come. And when they show up, that's a good sign. So thank you, everybody who's here so far. We're going to get started. First of all, if you haven't already noticed, live captions have been enabled for this event. If you would like to view the captions, you can find the live transcript option at the bottom of your Zoom window, or if your screen is not maximized, you can click the More option at the bottom of the screen to find it in the menu. These transcriptions are automatically generated. The chat and question boxes are open, so feel free to make use of those. Remember to set your chat to all panelists and attendees if you would like to chat with others in the Zoom room. And once again, if you have any questions for the panelists, please make sure that you drop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat so that they don't get lost in the conversation. Please also note that Brookline Booksmith has a strict policy against abusive behavior and language, and at our discretion, any attendee can be removed from an event for such behavior. Welcoming to this evening's event and moderating is Dr. John Sharp. It is wonderful to have you here this evening with Adam Stern, discussing committed dispatches from a psychiatrist in training. My name is Alex Schaffner. I'm the events director here. Whether you know our store well or have never heard of us before, thank you for being a part of our community. And thank you for those of you who have for buying copies of Committed from us. We're only able to put on programming like this because of the support you show through your book sales. And as a reminder, if you buy a book through the Eventbrite page where you signed in, anytime through 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, your book will come with a signed and personalized book plate. So thank you so much for that. And to introduce our wonderful moderator, Dr. John Sharp. Dr. Sharp is a board-certified psychiatrist on faculty at the Harvard Medical School and the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He is a member of the American College of Psychiatrists and a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. He's the author of 2 books, The Emotional Calendar and The Insight Cure. There really couldn't be anyone better qualified to be a part of this conversation. So thank you so much, Dr. Sharp, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Alex. That's so nice of you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're having a great time, and I'm really excited to get this conversation going. So
Alex is getting some free psychotherapy from 2 psychiatrists pre-webinar, so she's in good shape.
Yeah, I've never felt better. Dr. Adam Stern is a psychiatrist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's written extensively about his experiences as a physician in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the American Journal of Psychiatry. He lives with his family near Boston, and that's one of the true joys of getting to have him here tonight is being able to welcome and celebrate the first book by a wonderful local author and practitioner. So it's wonderful to get to celebrate tonight Committed. Boston is home to, as I'm sure all of you know, several of the best psychiatric hospitals in the country. By the way, I made my font very small and I have very, very bad vision, so I apologize for any mistakes that I'm making right now. Zoom is your friend. These include Harvard affiliate McLean, and Harvard's medical program, including in psychiatric medicine, is more or less peerless. So to be selected for a Harvard residency is a rare and incredible opportunity. But grad school is hard, and med school is hard, and harder still, I think, is learning to balance the incredible stressors of a uniquely high-pressure, insular setting like this, alongside compassion and close focus on the struggles and the complexity of your patients. There's a lot going on for everyone in that equation. And in this book, I think Adam shares this secret life and the necessity of connection and the patience on every side of the equation just beautifully. So it is an absolute pleasure to welcome Adam Stern.
Wow, thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction. And now I see Alex has taken her leave, and I will let Dr. Sharp take over.
We'll see where this goes for everybody. Adam, this is a heck of a book, man. This was a great read.
That's very kind of you.
I'm sure people are going to want to know a lot more about what inspired you. I think you laid it all out really well, but can we just go through some of the content? Like you in the prologue, for example, talked about soaring, right? And feeling better knowing that you weren't soaring alone, right? And that theme, I think, tracks throughout the book. So tell us a little bit about that, about the, it's an individual experience, but there's also a togetherness that you convey. How was that important to you?
Yeah, I think you're right on with that. This idea of soaring, it's very close to an idea of falling when you think about it, if you're a person. And so one of the analogies of the book, I would say, is that people can't really get through great distress all by themselves, but together, a lot of the times you can. And residency, there's no better example than residency training, where in our class, it was a group of 15 of us, and we grew incredibly close. There are 15 people from—
Did you know them beforehand?
I didn't know anybody before. I didn't live in Boston. I was up in Syracuse, New York, at a great school called SUNY Upstate Medical University. And I moved to Boston, didn't know anybody.
To come to Harvard, dude, you must have been intimidated.
Yeah. I mean, you're hitting on something very real, which is, if you come to a place like Harvard, but really, frankly, any residency training program, you look around and it probably looks like everybody's got it figured out. They're not sweating as they're doing their job, and you only have access to your own inner world. So I think it's only a natural setting for imposter syndrome to sort of set in.
Which is interesting, right? So I think when you say imposter syndrome, it sort of explains itself, but maybe you want to unpack that concept a little bit, because, there's a saying from AA. I do a lot of addiction psychiatry, and there's a lot of great sayings in AA. And one of the many sayings is, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides, right? So here you were seeing these people all looking cool, calm, collected, and you were feeling like an imposter? Is that what it was?
Yeah, to me, imposter syndrome is this feeling like, well, I've found myself here. And by the way, in medicine, we all get placed based on the algorithm of the match. It's a very mysterious process. So I matched at Harvard somewhat unexpectedly, and a lot of my classmates, some of whom may be on the call right now, a lot of them came from really wonderful places that you've heard of, and there were Harvards and Yales and Dukes and all kinds of different places. And sometimes when I would meet someone, they had never heard of the medical school that I had been to, or more realistically, those schools hadn't even really interviewed me 4 years earlier. So I looked around and thought, how do I fit in with this group of miraculously bright, incredibly intelligent, but also sensitive and creative and diverse, diversity of opinions. And the whole thing was really overwhelming, until I actually got to know my classmates and realized they're people just like me, and they're all just doing the best they can.
There's a
And
lesson in that, isn't there? That we
yeah,
need to get to know the kind of inner humanity that, each of us feels. And it's maybe not so different once you really get to know someone well.
right. And it's hard to understand what someone is experiencing just from looking at them. I mean, that's a core tenet of psychiatry, right? Is you sort of have to have the patient tell you what's going on with them.
Yeah, but if you judge a book by its cover, this is pretty damn good. I think this is a great looking book, man. I do.
It is a handsome book. I do think they did a great job with the cover and the whole thing.
But it is even better on the inside, and you got to get to know someone on the inside. That's true. That's true. So you were getting to know what it's like to be a psychiatrist, which, as everyone understands, is a specialty, practice in medicine. So you're already starting to get used to being a doctor, right? And then you had to get used to becoming a psychiatrist. And then you had to get to know your peers and start to not feel intimidated. And I love in the book the way you really weave those two elements together, the getting to know your patients and, meeting the challenges of care, and also getting to know your classmates and, I don't know, working out your love life while you were at it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One of the things that I thought was most appealing about the book is that I wanted to convey to people what it's like for a brand new resident, for someone just out of medical school, because what a lot of people don't necessarily automatically register is that in medical school, you're learning facts, you're taking in as much information as possible. It's the foundation of knowledge that will let you become a doctor. But it's not the job, right? You learn to do the job in residency training. And if you go straight through, like from college to med school to residency, like I did, you're like in your mid-20s when you start that job. And for me, it was the first job of my life, really. I mean, I'd had summer jobs, but it was the first full-time gig, and to be placed immediately in a situation where you are responsible for the healthcare, the well-being of lots of people all at once with appropriate supervision, of course, it's an overwhelming thing, especially sometimes when comparing it to how some of your peers might have been doing if they, let's say, didn't go to graduate school and were living a different kind of life, going out, meeting people. I like to think of new residents to some extent almost like as high achieving and often brilliant as like my classmates were. We can also sometimes be a little bit developmentally stunted because we've just been in school our entire lives until that point. And so I thought that angle, describing the social aspects of the residency, how close you become, these lifelong bonds that you form, was so important. And I hope that it's something that draws readers in while they're also getting this experience about, well, how do you take a wide-eyed, naive medical graduate and turn them into this psychiatrist that, that goes along with what everyone assumes a psychiatrist should be.
It's true. It's true, Adam. There's like a tenderness in not only the way you tell your story of your experience, but of the tenderness of relationships. Like we get the idea that some of your classmates, maybe were a little unsure themselves, how to communicate, the kind of affection that they had for one another, and trying to determine kind of where you stand, while you're really trying to like save lives or not goof up, How did you manage that? I mean, for me, the fear I had of not goofing up, the fear of like, I wouldn't want to let somebody die on my watch, literally as an intern, just kept me up at night, and I guess at some point you start to gain confidence in yourself. Where in your journey did that start to develop?
Yeah, I think you're right, especially in the early goings, especially when you're on overnight, for example. You are just trying to make sure that everyone is as healthy and well as when you took over the shift in the morning when you handed over. And something that's unique among medical training is that you are doing handoff to the same people over and over and over again. So it forms almost like a link fence where you have to do a good job so that your colleague can continue the good job, so that the next person can continue the good job. And at the end of it, the patient ideally is getting better, getting a really great treatment. But you don't want to be the one that lets your guard down or lets something bad happen. And then at the exact same time, bad things do happen, right? In medicine's hard, and psychiatry is hard, and negative outcomes happen. And one of the things I wanted to convey in the book was that it's okay, that sometimes you can do everything right, and just by virtue of the natural course of things, there can still be a negative outcome, and coming to terms with that, and not letting that necessarily take over your entire psyche around your job and your career was a lesson that took me a long time to learn.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on that now. I remember needing to be consoled, by supervisors, by attendings, actually by our chief at the hospital once. He was saying that, a patient can go see a cardiologist, have a normal EKG, walk out to the car, have a heart attack and die. It doesn't mean that the cardiologist necessarily did anything wrong, and we don't really feel that way, as psychiatrists. If someone is impulsive or takes their own life, we can feel responsible, and finding a way to live with that kind of risk, and also hold out hope to everyone who comes knocking on our door that we can make their life better. It's quite an undertaking.
Right. And hope, you're getting at it exactly. Hope is a very powerful thing and necessary thing, but also it is a challenge if you're meeting someone for the first time, but they're not meeting the system for the first time. A lot of patients, for example, on the inpatient unit where residents often get started, some of those patients have been in psychiatric care, in and out of psychiatric care for decades. And they know, there are some people in the book where the patients really understand the system better than the brand new intern. And I learned a lot from those patients.
Yeah, I bet you did. And isn't it kind of weird though that, like you point out, like for someone who's more experienced as a patient than you are as a doctor, it's true that you are new to them, but you also represent the system to them. You kind of are in that moment the representative of the system, and yet you're unique, and you're new for them. I guess you just explain that to them, or help them to really get a
That's
feel for the new opportunity you
Yeah,
bring.
that's a hard thing to figure out, because a lot of that, as you know, is sort of unconscious projection, right? So patients will sort of put out their own ideas about what psychiatry is all about and how it may have failed them over the years. And if you're the intern on overnight, you're the one receiving those feelings. And somewhere in the book I liken it to being sort of reflective glass, that a lot of it will get reflected back to the patient, and it's your job to hold those emotions with them, and that's part of the therapeutic process, I think. But then some of it makes it through and lands sort of with you, and trying to make sense of, how do I cope around those difficult emotions while trying to live my life, while trying to do good and do a good job at work and take care of people, take care of myself. All of those things, I think, are a challenge that most people outside the field may not have access to.
Yeah, how do you do it when you go home at night? I'm not just asking you, I'm saying for all of us, we have to find a way to, kind of be healthy and reset, and, see what we need to learn about doing better, and see what we learn, not to take personally. It's a lot of sorting out and a lot of
Yeah.
self-care.
And it goes in both directions, I think, where when I'm home with my family, I do my best to be able to mostly be focusing on what's going on at home, right? Although sometimes the responsibilities bleed in, so to speak. But when you're in with patients during your working hours, you need to be able to do sort of the opposite, right? So that your kid is having their first day at summer camp, and you're nervous about that, but you need to be able to put that on pause for a little while and devote your full attention to the patient in front of you. So that's another skill that took me a fair bit of time to sort of garner and I don't want to say master, because I'm still working on it.
Being present, though, it's really a practice, that you can improve on every day, really. Do you, we're two psychiatrists talking, so obviously we're biased, but do you think we have a harder time, like, not taking things personally, not taking things home, than, like, I don't know, some ID chief who's like making rounds on complex cases?
I met a lot of very sensitive infectious disease doctors over the years, but I think
I'm not saying anything bad about those
right.
guys.
No, I hear you. I'm getting ahead of it and saying I love infectious disease doctors.
Need them.
Need them, absolutely. But but I think that psychiatry is self-selecting for people with who at least identify as having good empathy. That's sort of a core tenet to the profession, in my opinion, is an ability to connect with people at their most basic human level. And so I wonder about that. That's a great question. Do people in psychiatry have a greater tendency of bringing home, the maybe the doubts, the worries, the sadness that sometimes comes with our line of work? It might be the case.
I was at a bar mitzvah the other day, by which I mean several years ago, pre-COVID, sitting next to a cardiologist, and we got into this inane discussion about like which was more important, like the heart or the brain. So of course, being a psychiatrist, I advocated for the brain, and then finally at the end, he looked at me and said, "Yes, but my organ perfuses your organ." And I figured, okay, it was time to go to the bar. Time to end the discussion.
Well, I can't let that story go without giving a shout out to my brother and my father, who are both cardiologists.
I didn't know. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, and they will tell you that the brain's not going to do much without the heart pumping blood to it. So more power to them, I guess.
All right, let's get back to the book. So you have in your book a little love story going on, and I was reading it, and I thought, I couldn't tell if it was going to be Rachel or Jesse. Like, how did that evolve? How did you pick the winner?
Oh, that gives me far too much credit. I think I think that my relationship developed over years, like a lot of strong relationships do, where it wasn't obvious right at any given moment in the first sort of era or eras of the relationship that it was going to work out. And just being me and the regular self-doubts that I carry in daily life, there was a lot of inner monologue about, well, is this good? Is this happening? No, it's not happening. Okay. And I write about that in the book at length, I would say.
There is a lot of inner monologue being described, and that's one of the things that I love about the book, because we all have that inner narrative, and I've been fascinated by that for years, as you know, and you make yours plain, which is one of the ways that we get in your head, which is what's so wonderful, I think.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm so delighted, I'm overjoyed to have written this book, for it to be out in the world. And at the same time, there's just this tiny little part of it that's super weird, because now everyone that I work with, everyone that's reading the book, strangers, know this great amount of like what that process was like for me, how our relationship evolved and that kind of thing. And credit to my wife to allow me to tell this story, because she's a very private person, and it was a very brave thing for her to allow me to tell the story. So I appreciate that.
Did you have to run it by her more than once?
Oh yeah. She was the best. I came up with the idea for the book, and I ran it by the literary agent to say, do you think there's a story here? I think there is. I really think there's something good here. And she said, that's actually a really great idea, I think. And I said, wait, before we go further, I need to actually make sure I can tell this story. And I asked my wife, and we came to a consensus, I'll say. And then she was the very first person to read the very first draft, I would say, that was completed. And
initial reaction?
Say it again.
What was her initial reaction?
Her initial reaction was, well, that's pretty much me. But now that the book is out and out into the world, I think she is eager to reread it, because now she's potentially thinking, like, which of these parts of me that are true to form, are people reading about, reminding herself of that. So I'll get back to you in the department sometime about how it goes on the second read.
I think you were very careful, not too careful, but in a very considerate kind of way. But this is nonfiction, right? So like is this fictionalized nonfiction, or is this more like fiction in the end? Like, how did you figure out how much to in terms of poetic license built in?
Right. That's a really important question, and one that I've given a lot of thought to, because, there's this great tradition of medical memoirs, but a medical memoir, it has to be based on a core of truth, but at the same time, you have to protect everyone's privacy who wants to be protected, or you need to protect. And so I essentially looked at a lot of things that have been written in the past, and saw how those authors did it. I consulted with sort of experts in this particular medical legal kind of field. And then I went forward with a few different ideas. So the first was I got my wife on board. The second was I reached out to my classmates, what we tongue in cheek refer to ourselves as the golden class. And we're pretty good, but I don't know if we're golden all the time. But I reached out to them, and for the most part, everybody was super supportive. Anyone who wasn't, really encouraging, wasn't represented in the book. And I did make liberal use of what I could in terms of creating some composite characters. Some characters are very clearly who they are. So I'm me, and my wife is really just my wife. And there are a few other characters like that are very clear. If you know us, you know who I'm writing about. Even those characters, some of the names are changed for privacy's sake. A lot of these people have careers that are ongoing and new patients walking in their office every day. And I didn't want this book to necessarily impact them and their professional life in that way. And
so
then
you've got a range of reactions, it sounds like, mostly positive.
Yeah, the vast majority. I mean, everybody was very encouraging. There was just maybe one or two responses that were like, "Hey, that's a great idea, but I don't necessarily need to be in the book," kind of thing, which was fine, and I totally respected that.
That's not too bad. I was going to ask you, how bad did it get? Did anybody really get down on you for this?
No, not back to me. I want, who knows about what people are saying out in the world somewhere.
I haven't heard anything, so I don't
that's
know.
a relief.
I think you're okay.
That's a relief.
And so you tried to keep it, pretty much as nonfiction, but just protecting people's kind of privacy and identity as possible.
Yeah. And, there's, especially in particular when you're telling stories with patients, details, I say this right up front in the author's note, details have been deliberately changed and altered, so that my goal is that even the people, some of whom have given me explicit permission to tell this story, even they might not recognize themselves in a particular version of the story, because things have been switched around in some ways, or multiple people have been combined into a single character. Those were the techniques
that amalgamation is a good technique.
Yeah.
So you bring out the highlights of an experience that you want to share, but you package them together in a way so it's not the same one individual identifiable identity. Yeah.
And that was a challenge, that in the process of writing the book, which I've never written a book like this, and the process of trying to create character arcs out of real people's stories while also protecting their privacy was definitely one of the most sort of interesting and challenging aspects of doing the book.
You could have gone for fiction, I suppose, right? I mean, you could have just made it fiction, except it could have been essentially your true story.
Yeah, there were times where I regretted that it wasn't fiction, in the sense that I could have made things more dramatic, or things might have turned out differently in various ways if I could have had the freedom of write anything, but that's not what this book was. The proposal was a memoir based in a kernel of truth, and then protecting identities around that. I said that sort of right up front, and the publisher, to their credit, was on board and guided me through that. They've done a lot of this kind of writing before, and so I had a lot of really good resources to help me.
I like how you stuck with it. You stayed true to your idea, and the publisher who backed you. You guys just kept going in that direction.
Yeah.
There are psychiatrists, who've written combinations of things. There's a elder statesman named Irv Yalom who wrote some textbooks and who also wrote some novels that, completely crazy psychiatric stuff, probably true, but fictionalized. So you couldn't really tell. So who knows? Maybe your next one could be fiction.
I've got some ideas, John. I have to tell you, I have some ideas, and they are closer to fiction than anything else. So I'll have to get back to you on that someday.
Does your publisher have the right of first refusal, or are you free to shop it around?
I think
You don't have
so.
to answer that.
Yeah, let me look into that a little bit.
Better read the contract, make sure. I actually can tell you that my first book, I liked the publisher a lot, but maybe thought I wanted to go in a different direction the second time, and they did have the right of first refusal. So I didn't know what to do. So came up with a brilliant idea of submitting a subpar, manuscript suggestion, so that it would be like thumbs down. So I was free to go and move about the country. I hope this doesn't get me in trouble.
The challenge is turning that off and knowing how to then say, oh, wait, let me actually get this, firing on all cylinders kind of thing.
The way you want it to be.
Just for the people, and I learned that term, first refusal, in this process, but just for anyone listening who doesn't know what you're referring to, do you mind defining it for us?
No, please. Oh, sure. I was going to say, why don't you? It's oftentimes, it's very difficult. I mean, everyone here is a bookie, right? Like, we're interested in reading and ideas, and you're used to books. And I got to say, it is really, really hard to get published. Even to get an agent to take a look and to shop it around, to get a publisher to get behind you, and then all the edits and rewrites you have to do. It is a tremendous amount of work. And so you wind up with a significant legal contract to the publisher, and they have really all the power. And you have some ability to negotiate typically, but it's really like David and Goliath. So in the end, one of the things that the publisher can do is to insist on the right of, having a chance to publish your next book, or to refuse before you have a chance to go anywhere else. It's not unusual in publishing. Right. If they like you, they'd like to see whether they like to have you do something else with them again before going anywhere else.
So I'll let them answer at some point whether they like me or not. I love them; they're terrific. So I'll just say that out loud too.
Everyone listening to this webinar can help them like you by buying not one but several copies of your book. I bought 2, so I'm happy.
Thank you very much.
What else did I want to ask you? I want to ask you about, let's get back to like the doctor-patient thing. So you talked about caring for a whole range of patients as the book went along, and I just saw so many different types. Does the complexity that we're faced with day to day weird you out? I mean, are you confident now when you wake up that you can see a patient, you're going to be able to handle whatever walks through the door? Because that must have been a real challenge from the start.
Yeah, that's one of the, for sure, that is one of the growth pathways that residents undertake is you enter feeling like, I don't even know really how to manage the most basic, straightforward case. And by the time I was moonlighting in my 3rd year, trying to earn some extra money and save up for an engagement ring, by that time I realized I started going around to different systems around Massachusetts, as we were entitled to do once we were fully licensed. And I realized that the training had done us extraordinarily well. We could, because by virtue of how it was structured, we knew how to operate in multiple different systems. Different online medical records didn't faze us, different prescribing techniques, different forms. We were used to that because every couple of months we would bounce from one place to the next. And that was something that logistically I learned, and clinically it came over time. The more patients you see, the more experience you have, not necessarily always knowing the right answer, but knowing that if you do your best and you try to connect with the patient, more likely than not, you're going to be able to help in some way.
And you'll be able to handle the situation, and you'll be able to see the patient again, and you'll be able to continue to improve their condition as you go along.
Right.
Did you reach that point at the end of residency? And I'm only asking this because I didn't really. I mean, I could look like I did, but it took me several years in practice and continuing with supervision from, our seniors to gain the sense that, whatever walks in the door, I'm going to be able to, have a plan, and I'm going to be able to carry that plan out. That took a while after residency for me.
Yeah. I'll speak as someone who at this moment, I guess, what am I, 8 years out of residency or so? And so I'm there's probably still learning ahead of me. I'll put it that way. There's no doubt that, there's this phrase that very, people who are really good people will say that they want to be lifelong learners. You've probably heard that phrase. It's almost too sweet to take, but you know, there is something to that you can continue to get better and better the more you practice.
It's the
I
practice
guess,
of medicine, right? I mean,
yeah,
it
that's
really
why
is
maybe
called
that's
the
why it's
practice of
called
medicine.
practice. Yeah. And I think that I'm still, in some ways you get better, but there's a flip side. The further you get from certain experiences, the more rusty you feel in those, right? So I don't spend a lot of time on the inpatient service anymore. And so, you know, when I have to do something related to the inpatient service, it's like, oh yeah, it all comes flooding back. But I bet I was better at this, you know, whatever skill or filling out or this, you know, form when I was a resident doing 8 of them a night, for example.
It's true. Well, you can keep, you know, doing what you're most interested in and, you know, help patients that way, you know. Speaking of which, what are you going to do when people call you now? Because, you know, you're out there, you're going to get emails or phone calls
Yeah.
about, oh, Dr. Stern, I read your book. I can connect to your humanity. Can you help me out? I hope you're ready for that.
That process has already begun. I will
Has it?
admit it has. And you know, the fact is that I spend half my time doing something called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and the other half doing research in TMS. And I have just a couple of really just a few private patients that have been with me for a number of years, but I don't do other kinds of psychiatric care. So I have a way to say, you know, I'd love to be able to help you find someone really great, but your treater isn't me. Although what I think part of what you're getting at,
You're disappointing a lot of people right now. I'm telling you, man.
well, I think you say that because the book, the way I've written it, at least portrays me like not as a very skilled person in any one therapeutic modality, but rather as someone who cares about people. And I tried to write that true to form because I think that's really at the core of what we do. And so I think if people are approaching me and saying, "Hey, are you taking new patients?" or anything like that, I think it stems from that, don't you? That it's like just this feeling like, oh, this guy kind of gets it because he knows that patients are people and you want to treat them like people and connect with them first, and then all the bells and whistles come later.
Yeah, Adam, you have a good soul, man. It comes across, you know, and that's, you know, your journey. That is becoming a specialist in psychiatry. You know, being a good soul. This is what, you know, you're describing in the book. You know, it's not like, you know, I'm a psychoanalyst and so you should come see me because I'm skilled at that one thing, or, you know, or now you're a TMS guy, so come see me because I'm skilled at that one thing. It's. I mean, you are, but it's more, I think, about your humanity, you know, and your interest in really connecting to others. And people probably will come to ask for your guidance, you know, if you're not able to care for them directly, you know, which is you know, it's a problem in a way because you're going to be busy, you know, responding, but it's a good problem, you know, and we all went into this to help other people, and helping them find the care that they need is terrific.
Yeah, and I'll just say a major issue, you know, people don't have access to the care. You know, psychiatric services are just so inadequate. Even in a great state like Massachusetts, where there are a lot of resources, people still have a hard time finding good mental health care. So
They're splintered.
If I can
People
get
don't
off
know
my
how about
soapbox,
it.
say yeah.
No, I'm saying this, I'm agreeing with you that the care is splintered and it's hard to really know how to navigate, you know, and if you're in some kind of crisis or you're dealing with a family member who is, or a friend, you know, you're stressed, and it's very confusing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know,
Hey,
but now we can call you, so we're in good shape.
I'm noticing Alex saying that we've got so many great questions. I'm wondering, should we open it up?
Talking for hours, but let's open it up.
Just be you and me.
Yeah, let's do it. No, we want to be inclusive. So Alex,
Yeah,
share with
hello.
us some questions.
Yes, we have some great stuff. Before it gets lost in the chat, we have one from Brianne who says, "What do you wish you had known in your first year of residency?"
Yeah, so the thing that I would most wish to have known was that it would be okay and that you're not alone in this feeling, right? So that first year was really marked by this feeling like looking around and seeing incredibly talented people and seeing incredibly distressed patients in very acute settings like the inpatient unit or the emergency department. even on medicine, knowing that you've got what it takes to get through it. And the whole program, the whole training program is designed to help you get there, and, I was really lucky to have a lot of really great teachers, mentors, people who work in the program that are, they're devoting their careers to training the next generation of people. They're still doing it, a lot of them. So I would say if I knew that and had that sense for sure, things would have gone a lot more steadily, emotionally.
That makes absolute sense. I think that sort of also asks a great question that probably many psychiatric professionals have for themselves, which is how do care providers manage to retain empathy while avoiding burnout, even at that early stage?
Yeah, that's a tough question because that's a real problem. I think burnout is in medicine, in modern medicine, is almost everywhere. Everywhere you look, doctors are feeling burnt out. There's a moral injury aspect that's become popularized recently. Dr. Sharp, if you want to jump in here, I would be delighted to hear your take on it. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I mean, you're right. That's a great question. And, burnout, this links back to the answer to the first question that Alex brought to us, which is that you need to know that you're not alone. You need to know that there's a system around you that will help. Burnout really is a system failure as much as it is, an individual's like fatigue at caring. There is such a thing as compassion fatigue. That's another problem, but I think we as psychiatrists learn as part of our training how to monitor ourselves and how to try to prevent it. Burnout requires a whole system around us to protect us.
Yeah, and I'll just add one very concrete thing, which is that as a society, I do think we need to do better about destigmatizing seeking mental health. I think there's a lot of progress being made, even on a daily basis, in terms of public figures that are disclosing their own mental health concerns or taking time for themselves. Within medicine, there is an issue where people are reluctant to seek out therapy, for example, because they're worried it will come back in some way. And medical boards ask those kinds of questions in different states. They ask in different ways, but that's a real issue. And residents are at extraordinarily high risk for things like depression, anxiety. And I don't have all the solutions, but I definitely think it's a problem we need to do better with.
Ellen has a question that sort of segues off of empathy. Do you encounter patients you just do not like at all, that you find annoying or downright mean and hateful? And what do you do, or what have you done in the past when you have encountered patients like that? What have you done with your feelings?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's a great question. It's a very real question. We're human beings, right? So we experience the whole range of emotions, just like everybody who's listening to this. The first thing to notice, if you have a really strong reaction to a patient, is to ask yourself, well, hold on, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way? I wonder if I'm bringing some of this to the table, or if the patient is bringing some of this to the table, because you know yourself and you know how you react to most situations. And, you might have a sense that there might be an element of what I refer to in the book as this old psychodynamic principle of projective identification. A patient may be putting out unconsciously certain emotions that they're not even aware that they're doing, and they might land with you, and you might start to feel that. That's a very common thing, and it's all around us without us really even realizing it. So if I can slow things down and try to take a step back, talking to your peers about it, or your mentors, even better, is a very often a useful thing, because then again you can see perspectives that you're not seeing in the moment.
And that can be a quick process. That doesn't have to mean like you get on the psychoanalytic couch. That can just be like, you call up a colleague and be like, oh, dude, this patient really got under my skin. I'm not even sure I totally get it, and then in 10 minutes, you'll have perspective that you didn't have before.
Totally.
Melissa asks, did you feel a sense of competition in having contact with the patient? When I've been in a medical hospital, the Beth Israel, the student would show up at 5 a.m., the intern at 6 a.m., and the residents at 7.
So I'm not exactly sure what this question is asking in particular with regard to competition. Is it competition about having access to the patients, that kind of thing. I'm not sure. I might be misunderstanding the question. But what you allude to, this 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m. thing, that is another systemic issue that I wish we would do better with. Sleep is super important. Patients feeling like they're being taken care of, that they're not a cog in a machine, or they're not just sort of on a conveyor belt of the medical system. Here's the med student, they're pre-rounding before the pre-rounds, and then the resident who's rounding before the rounds, and then the attending comes for rounds. And people hate that. Patients feel like they can't wait to get out of the hospital because in addition to all of that, there are the dings and the bells, and all because your pulse oximeter fell off your finger or whatever it might be. So there are important reasons that these systems are set up the way they are. But to what I hope is the part of the I think it was Melissa's question, the system is not well established for a sense of wellness in the hospital. We could probably do better. And I hate waking patients up, just by the way. I'll just say that's, there are so many parts of the job that I adore, that I love, that I connect with. And then there are a handful that I just cannot stand. And waking a patient up to ask them a question is I hate it. It's just so terrible. I don't have to do it much these days, thankfully.
I just want to, can I just point out that was Adam's compassion there, very long and lovely answer to the question. The short answer would have been yes. There's a lot of competition and people are trying to best each other and prove that they're, qualified and we have to manage that too.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was actually wondering sort of an opposite to that question. Earlier you were talking about how, especially when you're new to it, you may encounter people who are very, very intimate with the system as patients, and you're new to it as a practitioner. Is that something that you tended to sort of like fess up to, or does that undermine the treatment by you saying, I don't know as much as I might? Does that sort of ruin treatment somewhat? Or on the other side, do you ever feel at risk of being sort of too rigid in your self-confidence and your medical knowledge?
Yeah, so there are a few things there that I think I'll try to speak to. One, I think you're getting at a point that's important, which is that sometimes you not necessarily knowing exactly what to do is actually a way to connect with the patient. You might actually open up and say to the patient, here's the dilemma that I'm facing. I'm not really sure which path we should go down because of X, Y, or Z. And so sometimes it can actually be helpful to have your flaws on display. One example of this that I think I brought up briefly in the book is, in our residency back then anyway, you get your very first therapy cases when you're in your second year of residency out of the 4 years, but you don't have an office yet because you're mostly in other parts of the hospital. You get your first case where you're doing meds and therapy and you meet with someone weekly, but you really just sort of find a time and rent an office in the department, and it's never your office. Your name's not on the door. It's always, and I always had that thought, like, the patient must know, first of all, I grew this beard to seem older, just putting that out there. When I was 27, when this happened, I was clean shaven and I just thought, I look too young. I've got cheeks like a baby. I better look like a doctor. So I grew a beard.
It's working, dude.
All right. Thank goodness. It's only taken this many years. But, we would be in a different office every week, and I would think to myself, the patient must know that how low on the totem pole I am because I have to rent an office every week to see them. And it's on the inner hallway without a window, it's that kind of thing. So that, I don't know, I'll just be very open and honest about that. That was something I always felt self-conscious about as an early resident. And then as you get a little bit further into residency, you progress a little bit. And there's a theme in the book about like an office with a window. And the great irony is in my current world right now where my office is, I have two lovely windows. They're surrounded by concrete. Like you can't see anything. One of them actually looks on a dumpster nearby. So the window is overrated, I've learned.
Darcy asks, Adam and John, many thanks for your career choice. That is not a question. That said, there seems to be a huge shortage of psychiatrists. How will this patient load be handled, and how can we interest more students in psychiatry? Many thanks.
John, do you want to take this one, or should I start out?
Well, we're trying to clone Adam, so that's a big work in progress. And we're trying to interest the medical students, in our specialty. And actually, Harvard Medical School is doing a better and better job of that. There's a lot to love, in all the medical specialties, and to get more people to appreciate how much we can do, how we can connect to people, how we can spend time caring for them, how we can combine neurobiology and imaging and psychotherapeutic techniques in a way that patient doesn't even have to. If you talk to a patient about a good encounter, the patient would be like, well, I felt like he understood me. I felt closer to him. I felt better about my problems. But what we're doing is something that's very technical, where we're really thinking very carefully behind the scenes about what we want to probe and how we want to deliver something with just the right timing. It's fascinating work. And I think the more we can talk about it like this, hopefully the more people can get interested and come in and join us.
Yeah, one of our biggest problems is stigma around the field, and I think one of the things I've actually observed Dr. Sharp teaching medical students. This was several years ago. I don't know, I wouldn't assume you'd remember it, but I observed it, and one of the things that I came away with that you did so well, John, was to convey to these students that psychiatrists are people and can be just regular people, right? There's this whole idea that people have about what a psychiatrist is, especially at a place like Harvard Medical School, and just conveying that idea. Another one of my mentors, Dr. Khan, is famous for this as well, asking people what's important to you, who are the important people in your life, how do you spend your time. These kinds of questions are just essential, and probably at least as important as what antidepressant you choose between one or another. And how do we get people into the field? I think we keep doing this kind of, like John said, we have to really convey to people that there's good to be done here, and you can do it and have a great career and help people in a way that's really different than a lot of other fields. In a field where psychiatry is a field where the person that you're working with, who they are, what's important to them, that's the most important thing to you as their provider, as their doctor as well.
That's one of the things that I love about the book, really. It's a bunch of, people doing the best they can and also having a good time together. It's probably not as frisky as Grey's Anatomy, but, we're psychiatrists, not surgeons. But it so shows you that, you can take care and learn and grow and have fun too, and I think the humanity comes across, which I think is attractive.
So I actually had a question that was about this. I have so many questions, and honestly, we could just sit here and talk about my questions all night. We will not do that. But one that I had was actually about sort of the unique position of psychiatric diagnosis as a part of a person's identity, because a lot of conditions are things that happen to you, or they're part of your experience, but psychiatric diagnoses are so frequently something that becomes part of someone's personhood. How do you navigate the utility of a diagnosis with the sort of personal weight that patients give it?
Yeah, that's a heavy one.
Is that your question, Alex?
Yeah, that's my question.
Whoa.
That's a heavy one because it's real and it's a challenge. Because when a patient comes to see you, if they're going through their insurance, the physician ends up billing the insurance with a diagnosis code, right? And sometimes someone doesn't fit nicely into a box the way that the diagnostic statistical manual says. And something I've never been quite comfortable with is that our manual that tells us what the diagnoses are that we have to choose from, it evolves over time, which is a good thing, but it's societally driven, right? So I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago, something like homosexuality existed in the DSM, which is an abomination in the modern era and any era, frankly. And that thankfully is gone now, but you can only imagine what do we have in there now that might evolve and change 20 years from now, 30 years from now. How will society continue to, can we keep up with society as hopefully things improve? To your point about sort of diagnoses as being part of identity, that is, I don't know, that's heavy because it's true. People can, especially when you get into the realm of things like personality disorders, which exist. There are treatments for certain personality disorders and things that can be helpful. But to tell someone that they have a personality disorder is something that will stick with them, and they'll, sort of incorporate that into their sense of self forevermore, I think. And so there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight to that kind of issue.
I totally agree. Another way to look at this is that, we're medical specialists. Our organ is the brain, right? So we have a diagnosis, which is a brain diagnosis, and it really can affect your identity. So the question to me is like, where is a person's identity located? Where is a person's sense of self located? And I try to help people understand that it's almost like behind what you observe. We don't know exactly where it is. Maybe it's in your heart, maybe it's somewhere deep in your brain, but like whatever's going on that's causing these symptoms that we have some labels for, like, you're not that. You're who you've always been. You're that light eternal inside you. It gets a little spiritual, I think, but you can, I think, use some spirituality to help disentangle this brain disease from someone's self.
Right. There can be times when the diagnosis is real and biological, and you can sort of show it. If you showed it to 5 psychiatrists, 4 or 5 of them will agree. And then there will be times when the diagnosis is totally insufficient, right? It doesn't at all get to the complex nature of the person and what drives them and what brings them in and what their experience is. And so that can be that's something that I think a good psychiatrist remains sensitive to. That idea that, look, we're gonna have this diagnosis, we're gonna talk about it, we're gonna treat it in this way, but also we need to be on the same page about how you and I are going forward in this treatment, because what I care most about as a clinician is that a patient starts to feel better, right, and do better and live a life that's aligned with their values. So, however they define that is what should be important to me as well.
That's a good answer. Alex, I think we're going to time out pretty soon. Can you think of one more question that we can field?
Well, I did want to comment that I think you both adequately answered the question of how do we get people interested in the field, because both of you had said that there's a great deal of stigma, not just about mental illness, but about the profession of psychiatry. And I think a lot of that stems from a very long and very significant period of very traumatic treatment. And the field has changed massively in the last 30, 40, 50 years. And I think you're demonstrating all of the things that are now more trustworthy and more flexible about modern psychiatry, as opposed to all of the things that people are used to when they read history or they watch movies. So I think you're actually giving an incredible answer to that question right here.
Thank you. I just want to say that the psychiatry comes by its reputation honestly. The scars of the profession have been earned, and some of it is really shameful. There's some shame in the history of psychiatry, things like lobotomies, things that we don't do anymore, versions of ECT that were portrayed, in movies years ago. So much of that has evolved and I would say it's one of the most humane and frankly empathic professions within medicine now.
Yeah, the difference between what people could hope for as a student or a patient now is so different from what they were raised understanding, is sort of the legacy. I think we can close out with a simple combination of 3 questions. So combining Tess, Mark, and Sadie, how does this book differ from your other writing? Did you take any writing classes before you wrote it? And are you going to write a sequel?
I love those questions, especially Mark Stern and I have the same last name. I wonder, yeah, he's my father. That's my father asking that question. So I think that I've been writing for as long as I can remember. Since I was a child, I would write stories. Some of them I think back to now, and they make me smile because they're so strange. But I've been writing for a long time. It's always been a way that I can process what I'm going through. For a while in college, I took some courses around fiction writing and creative nonfiction writing. In medical school, I focused more on things like nonfiction, creative nonfiction, in these medical literary anthologies. And I thought, okay, I'll just sort of put that aside for now and really focus on my academic work. And it wasn't until a few years ago I started writing more essays when I experienced some health issues myself. And I experienced being a patient and a doctor at the same time. That's what inspired me to start really writing again. And I wrote essays. You mentioned some of the places that they landed in, and that led to this book. So it's you can almost draw a straight line. And I'd love to keep writing, and I'd love to stay healthy enough and well enough to do it. So I hope you'll all come to the next event in a couple of years.
We would love
We're your
so
people, Adam.
much.
We'll support you. We will support you and be there for you and encourage you.
Thank you.
And we would love so much to be here for the launch of that future book. Thank you both so much. I really feel like this illuminates some of the best that the field currently has to offer to patients and to members of the field. So it's been an absolute pleasure to listen to both of you speak. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience who submitted such wonderful questions. And thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thanks so much,
Adam. Thank you for asking me to help you with this.
Yes,
You did
thank
such a
you.
great
I really
job.
appreciate you being here.
I'm very
All right.
grateful.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.